What happens when the biggest star in women's basketball says no to the NBA? Caitlin Clark knows how to use the word that many people struggle all their lives being able to use. Some of us never get it till we're old and just don't care no more. A word, take a guess. Take a guess. Controversy, debate, and of course, outrage from ESPN. Caitlin Clark, the face of the WNBA's future, just turned down an invitation to compete in the NBA's three-point contest during All-Star Weekend. Instead of celebrating her decision, sports media erupted into a frenzy. Some say she's dodging competition, while others argue she's making a bold move to uplift the WNBA. So what's the real reason behind her refusal, and why is ESPN so mad about it? Stay tuned, because we're breaking it all down right now. Alright, let's get into this because this whole Caitlin Clark situation has been making headlines nonstop. If you haven't heard by now, Caitlin Clark, the absolute superstar of women's basketball, just turned down an invitation to participate in the NBA's three-point contest at this year's All-Star Weekend. And man, people have a lot to say about it. ESPN, NBA fans, WNBA supporters, everyone's got an opinion and the debate is getting heated. The momentum that Caitlin Clark has this season, with her being close to being the face of basketball, both men's and women's this year, I just thought it was the perfect stage. And then obviously, the possibility of Steph Curry and Klay Thompson teaming up once again back in Golden State and doing that home reunion thing, and then having Sabrina and Caitlin. To me, it just sounded like so much fun, and it would definitely bring a little spark to NBA All-Star that NBA All-Star unfortunately hasn't. Now, let's be real here. Caitlin Clark is the biggest name in women's basketball right now. She's not just a player, she's a movement. Everywhere she goes, she's breaking records, selling out arenas, and pulling in massive TV ratings. So when she made the decision to skip out on the NBA's offer, it wasn't just some minor scheduling conflict, it was a statement, a message, and apparently it's one that ESPN and a lot of sports analysts weren't ready to hear. So why did she turn it down? Is she afraid of the competition? Is she making a mistake? Or is she actually playing the long game and making a power move that people just don't understand yet? Is another testament to where she is in the hierarchy of the sports food chain and, the ladder of power and influence. Because Caitlin Clark is Steph Curry and LeBron James. Like, she's, there's no difference. A great philosopher once said there's levels to this. She's on that. Here's the thing about Caitlin Clark. She knows her value. She's not some player just happy to get an invite to a big event. She knows that wherever she goes, the cameras follow, the money follows, the fans follow. And when she was given the opportunity to be part of an NBA event, she didn't just jump at the chance like some rookie trying to prove herself. No, she said, thanks, but I'll pass. I'll do my first three-point contest on my own terms in my own league. You see Caitlin Clark using her power to benefit the WNBA, saying, not that she'd never do anything with the NBA, but that she's not going to do it this time because the first time should be with the WNBA in front of the Fever fans. And that right there is what's making people lose their minds. For decades, women's basketball players have been fighting for attention, recognition, and financial investment. The WNBA has always been in the NBA's shadow. And any time a player gets a little bit of mainstream attention, there's this expectation that they should be grateful for any crumbs of recognition from the men's league. But Caitlin Clark isn't playing that game. She's flipping the script. She made it very clear she wants her first three-point contest to be at the WNBA All-Star Game in front of her home crowd in Indiana. And let's be honest, that's a smart move. Why should she be the NBA's special attraction when she could be the headliner of her own event? Why help boost the NBA's All-Star Weekend ratings when she could be putting all that attention on the WNBA instead? Of course, not everyone sees it that way. The second she turned down the offer, sports analysts went wild. You had people on ESPN debating whether she was making a mistake, questioning her decision, and of course you had the usual skeptics saying she was just dodging competition. Dodging competition? Are we serious right now? Caitlin Clark isn't afraid of competition. She's been torching defenses and setting records her whole career. If she wanted to be in the NBA three-point contest, she'd be in it. No one would stop her. But that's the point. She didn't want to, because she knows her worth, and she's not going to let anyone else dictate her moves. Stephen A. Smith, as usual, had a lot to say about it. Now, for once, he actually agreed with Clark's decision, but not without throwing in a few of his classic takes. He pointed out that the WNBA All-Star Game last year had record-breaking viewership, pulling in 3.4 million viewers, while the NBA All-Star Game was struggling to get numbers anywhere close to what it used to. The NBA's All-Star Weekend has been losing its appeal, and it's no secret that they were probably hoping Caitlin Clark could give it a boost. Let's talk about that for a second. The NBA isn't exactly at its peak when it comes to All-Star Weekend. The dunk contest, it's lost its magic. The All-Star game itself, players barely take it seriously anymore. Viewership has been declining, and the whole event just doesn't have the same energy it used to. So when Caitlin Clark comes along, a player who has single-handedly been breaking TV records and selling out arenas, you better believe the NBA saw an opportunity. And honestly, it makes sense from their perspective. Imagine the headlines. Caitlin Clark takes on the NBA's best in the three-point contest. People would tune in just to see how she'd do. Would she hold her own? Would she get crushed? The intrigue alone would be enough to drive millions of viewers. But that's exactly why she turned it down, because she saw what was happening. She knew she was being used as a ratings boost, and she wasn't about to let that happen. And look, let's not pretend that if she had accepted, the conversation would have been just as annoying in a different way. If she won, there would have been the usual, well, it's just a shooting contest, it's not real competition, takes. If she lost, people would have said, see, this is why the WNBA doesn't compare to the NBA. There was no winning scenario for her in that environment. Instead, she did something even more powerful. She reminded everyone that the WNBA matters. She's not some novelty act for the NBA's All-Star Weekend. She's the main event in her own league. And honestly, this decision might be one of the biggest power moves we've seen from a women's basketball player in a long time. It's not just about skipping a contest, it's about shifting the way people see the WNBA. For years, people have said that women's sports need the men's leagues to survive, that without the NBA's backing, the WNBA wouldn't be able to grow. But Caitlin Clark is proving that's not the case. She's driving ticket sales, breaking records, and making women's basketball a must-watch event on its own. Think about this. Last year, the WNBA's viewership and merchandise sales exploded. The Indiana Fever, the team Clark plays for, accounted for nearly half of the league's entire broadcast value. Half. That's insane. And it's all because of her impact. She's showing that the WNBA doesn't need to rely on the NBA's scraps to be successful. It can thrive on its own, with its own stars, its own storylines, and its own fan base. That's why this decision is so important. She's setting a precedent. She's telling future generations of female athletes, you don't have to latch onto the men's league for attention. You can be the main attraction in your own sport. And it's already working. Just look at how many people are talking about this. A decision about a three-point contest has turned into a full-blown debate about the future of women's basketball. That's how much influence she has. So yeah, ESPN might be furious, the NBA might be disappointed, some fans might not understand it, but Caitlin Clark knows exactly what she's doing. She's playing the long game, she's building something bigger than just one contest. And honestly, I respect the hell out of that. But what do you guys think? Was this the right move for Caitlin Clark? Should she have taken the opportunity to compete on the NBA stage, or was this the ultimate power move for women's basketball? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments, because this is one of those moments that's going to be talked about for years to come. And guess what? We're not even done breaking this down. There's still a lot to talk about, like how this could impact her career, what this means for the WNBA's future, and why some people think she might still change her mind. We'll dive into all of that in part 2. So make sure you stick around, because trust me, this conversation is just getting started. Alright, so now that we've broken down Caitlin Clark's decision to skip the NBA's three-point contest and why it's got ESPN and the sports world buzzing, let's take things a step further. Because this isn't just about one event, it's about something much bigger. The future of women's basketball, Clark's career trajectory, and how the NBA might respond to all of this. Let's start with something that a lot of people might not realize. Caitlin Clark just changed the game. Literally. Think about it. When has a WNBA player ever had the power to say no to the NBA? When has a female athlete ever had the leverage to dictate her own terms on this level? The answer? Almost never. For years, women's basketball has been chasing legitimacy, fighting for equal recognition, and struggling to carve out its own place in the sports world. And now here comes Caitlin Clark, flipping the entire conversation on its head. She's not begging for NBA attention. She's rejecting it. She's not looking for validation from the men's league. She's proving she doesn't need it. That is a seismic shift in the way we talk about women's sports. And ESPN, they don't know how to handle it. For decades, ESPN has treated women's basketball as a secondary product, something to be covered here and there, but never given the full spotlight. They'll highlight a few WNBA moments, throw in some stats when convenient, but at the end of the day, their bread and butter is the NBA. They know where the ratings come from, and they've never seen the WNBA as a real ratings driver. But Caitlin Clark is changing that narrative, whether they like it or not. When Clark plays, people watch. When Clark speaks, people listen. When Clark makes a move, like turning down the NBA, people talk about it. And ESPN, they're scrambling to figure out what to do next. Because let's be honest, they were hoping this NBA three-point contest story would go a different way. They were hoping she'd say yes, that they'd get a viral moment, that they could run endless highlights of Caitlin Clark versus NBA stars. That's ratings gold. But now they're stuck debating a much bigger issue, one that's forcing them to acknowledge the power of the WNBA in a way they never have before. And let's talk about that power shift for a second, because Caitlin Clark isn't just making a statement for herself. She's setting a new standard for women's basketball as a whole. For the longest time, WNBA players have been told that their only path to mainstream success is by aligning with the NBA. They've been encouraged to participate in NBA events, to seek out NBA comparisons, to find ways to fit into the larger NBA ecosystem. But Clark just said, no thanks, I'll do it my way. And that changes everything, because now future WNBA stars don't have to feel like they need the NBA's approval to be relevant. They can follow Clark's lead, build their own brands, and demand that the WNBA stand on its own 2 feet instead of always playing second fiddle. And let's not forget, Clark has the numbers to back it up. Last season, the Indiana Fever, Clark's team, was responsible for nearly half of the WNBA's total broadcast value. That's one team, one player. Think about that. Her jersey sales, #1 in the league, ticket demand through the roof, TV ratings, breaking records. She's not just a player, she's an industry. And the NBA, they know it. Which brings us to the next big question. How is the NBA going to respond to all of this? Because make no mistake, they're watching this unfold just as closely as ESPN is. The NBA has always had an interesting relationship with the WNBA. On one hand, they own a stake in the league. They provide financial support. They want the WNBA to succeed, at least on paper. But at the same time, they've never fully committed to making the WNBA a truly equal product. They keep it at arm's length, giving it just enough exposure to keep it afloat, but never enough to let it truly explode into the mainstream. And now they're realizing that Clark doesn't need them. She doesn't need the NBA's All-Star Weekend. She doesn't need their three-point contest. She doesn't need to be a guest star in their show. She's writing her own script. And that's a problem for the NBA. Because if Clark, and by extension the WNBA, can generate massive ratings, sell out arenas, and drive national conversations without the NBA's involvement, then what does that say about the NBA's role in all of this? It says that the WNBA doesn't need to be the NBA's little sister anymore. It says that women's basketball can be its own powerhouse. And for the NBA, that's a reality they might not be ready for. Because let's face it, the NBA has relied on being the only show in town when it comes to basketball. Sure, they support the WNBA in theory, but they've never seen it as a true competitor for attention. Now they have to start thinking about what happens if the WNBA continues to grow at this pace. What happens if more stars like Clark emerge and start pulling audiences away from the NBA? What happens if the WNBA starts demanding better TV deals, better salaries, and a bigger cut of the basketball economy? These are questions the NBA has never had to answer before, and Caitlin Clark just forced them onto the table. But let's bring it back to ESPN for a second, because while the NBA is probably feeling a little uneasy about what this all means long-term, ESPN is dealing with the fallout in real time. The network is built around the NBA. Their analysts, their programming, their entire basketball coverage revolves around the NBA as the gold standard. And now they have to sit there and acknowledge that the biggest story in basketball is happening outside of the NBA's control. That's why Stephen A. Smith's take on all of this was so interesting. Because even though he agreed with Clark's decision, you could tell there was frustration underneath it. Not necessarily at Clark, but at the reality of the situation. Because ESPN is used to controlling the basketball narrative. They decide what stories get pushed. They decide who gets attention. They decide who becomes a superstar. And now they're realizing that Clark isn't playing by their rules. She's not going to be used as a marketing gimmick for the NBA. She's not going to let ESPN dictate her career path. She's not going to be the WNBA player who gets to play with the NBA guys. She's going to be Caitlin Clark, and ESPN, they're just going to have to deal with it. But this is only the beginning, because if Clark is making these kinds of moves now, just imagine what she's going to do in the years to come. She's only going to get bigger. The WNBA is only going to grow stronger. And the NBA, ESPN, and the entire sports world are going to have to start looking at women's basketball in a way they never have before.